Hello everyone, how are you today? My name is Jeremy with Flyin Miata, and thank you for coming to our Facebook Live today. Today we're going to spend some additional time talking about something that we have talked about a bit in the past. We are going to talk about our Happy Meal kit, which is our combination of our Flyin Miata clutch with our Flyin Miata Lightweight Flywheel. We want to kind of look at this actually to back up a little bit and think of it as kind of a 101 video. So this is going to be looking at what it is, why you need it, when do you need it, etc., etc. We do have some additional videos that we've shot in the past which go into more technical detail and mechanical detail. So we'll still refer to those from time to time here and kind of keep this really high level just about the Happy Meal kit in general. And remember that we do have links in our product descriptions, things that we talk about, knowledge bases, etc. You'll be able to find that stuff in the product description after the video when it's posted on YouTube. So let's jump in. And also I do have a number of questions here from the crowd, and I'll try to get to those as part of the presentation, maybe get to some questions later on. So just so you know, if you have any questions as I'm going, feel free to put that in the chat, and we can take a look at those when I'm done talking over the stuff that I planned on talking about. So what is our Happy Meal kit? Back about 1996, actually, in the catalog, Keith just kind of made a joke about it. We had this package, which is our clutch and our flywheel, and he called it the Happy Meal, just kind of, as a parody. And somebody said, well, what's the toy? Well, the toy is the plastic clutch alignment tool. So that's the toy in the Happy Meal kit. And it just kind of stuck, and McDonald's has never called us. And this is just what we've been calling these since about 96. Our clutches and flywheels have always been a real staple product. We sell a ton of them. They're super awesome. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. So what's included in the Happy Meal kit? It starts with our lightweight flywheel. Over the years, we've had a number of these, which we'll talk about a little bit more later as far as different designs and weights, etc. But it's a lightweight flywheel. We also have a pressure plate, and the pressure plate comes in level 1 or level 2. We'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. And then we have the friction disc, and it's an organic sprung disc, and it's actually the same disc between the level 1 and the level 2. So the difference between level 1 and level 2 is just in the beefiness of the pressure plate. And then it also comes with a throwout bearing, aka release bearing. It comes with the pilot bearing and the clutch alignment tool, and then also with our clutch switch override, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. So, in no particular order, kind of get into some of the talking points about this stuff. Why a lightweight flywheel? What does that do for you? There's a lot to consider, and people always, you wear out the clutch, and you generally don't wear out a flywheel. However, when you've worn out your clutch and you're going to replacing the clutch anyway, people that are into performance driving, most people in most situations would also benefit from going to a lightweight flywheel at the same time, because it's really easy to install with the clutch. You're doing the same work. And it's going to give you a number of benefits. We've had some different designs over the years. Our current flywheel, it's about 10 pounds for the NAs and NBs, about 8 pounds for the NC. And it's made out of chrome ollie. It's one piece. In the past, we've had a slightly heavier version, but by far most of our customers went with the 10-pound version. So at one point we said, you know what, let's just focus on the 10-pound version because it's by far the most popular. Way back, if you go into the, hop in the phone booth on the, in the corner in UK and transport back in time, we used to do an aluminum flywheel that was about 8 pounds, and it was obviously aluminum with a bolted on steel friction surface and then a press fit steel ring gear. And that was about 8 pounds as well. Those were fantastic. They were a little noisy. As you go lower and lower in weight, basically, the flywheel has, because of its weight and size, it has rotational inertia and momentum that it maintains. So one of the reasons OEs go with a heavy flywheel is because there's a lot of inertia in there, and it helps so you've just got a butter smooth idle. It's really easy to engage the clutch. When the air conditioning comes on, it doesn't really bump you too much, but it's not great for performance. So, as with everything in the aftermarket, there's a trade-off. And when you go to the lighter weight flywheel, you can get some really awesome things. Like my favorite thing is you get improved throttle steer. So that's when you're in a steady state turn you can increase or decrease your angle of turning with your wheel in a steady state position by transferring the weight either from the front wheels or to the rear wheels and loading or unloading the front. And with a lightweight flywheel, that's just more abrupt. So you have a more responsive throttle steer with a lightweight flywheel because the engine is going to, you know, move up and down faster because it's not fighting that heavy inertia from a heavy flywheel. Also, you know, the responsiveness in low gears, it's going to be a little peppier in the lower gears. And also, you know, rev matching for like downshifting and when you're trying to do heel toe and rev match, it's going to be a lot more responsive with the lightweight flywheel. And some of that more technical stuff, once again, we do talk about in another video that we've done in the past, and that was called, you know, Clutches, Lightweight Flywheels, and Clutch Kits. So you might want to go look at that for a little bit more in-depth information. The downside to a lightweight flywheel is if it gets too light, you can start to get some vibration from the transmission, you know, because in your transmission between your gears, there's a certain amount of lash between the gears. And with the heavy flywheel, it's got all that heavy inertia and it's keeping the gears pinned up against each other. But as you make it lighter, it doesn't have that said inertia. And then so the gears are going to be able to kind of slap within the lash a little bit more and your transmission is going to get a little bit noisier. And we found that when we got down to about 8 pounds with our old aluminum one, it was starting to get kind of noisy. Whereas with this 10-pound one, it's really kind of in a sweet spot. It's really not that noisy. It's still about half the weight of stock, which, you know, those are, you know, 18 to 20 pounds depending on the year of the car. So it's in this sweet spot of giving you those performance benefits without being so light that it kind of starts to get noisy, and also being one-piece chromoly. You know, it's going to be, you know, more long-term reliable than the, you know, the old aluminum piece that had the steel stuff bolted and shrunk onto it, if that makes sense. So a question might be, when would you not want a lightweight flywheel? Well, you know, if you spend 100% of your time in stop and go traffic, it's not going to be as smooth as a stock flywheel. However, you know, most of us, if you're watching this, you're probably into performance. From the performance perspective, the one place where I would generally recommend sticking with a stock flywheel is in drag racing. If you're driving a Miata, you're probably not into drag racing, although maybe there's some guys out there. But with drag racing, trying to get a nice consistent launch is going to be easier with a heavier flywheel. So with all the different kinds of performance driving that Miatas can do, that's probably the one place where you might want to stick with the stock flywheels in drag racing. With another little caveat that another place to be considerate of that is if you have a supercharged car. Because with a supercharger, you're going to have a lot of extra parasitic draw from the belt drag, you know, the belts on the crank pulley and then going up to the supercharger pulley, and the engine has to work that pulley and provide that energy. And so having the lighter weight flywheel and the less mass, it's going to make your idle quality more challenging with a supercharged car. So, you know, if you have a supercharger and you're really concerned about idle quality, you might want to stick with a heavier flywheel. But if you're more into the performance and you're willing to make those trade-offs for the, you know, improved throttle steer and more responsiveness, et cetera, then maybe, you know, you just kind of suck it up and deal with the fact that the idle quality is not as good. But with a naturally aspirated or a turbo car, the difference in idle quality, it's there, but it's really kind of negligible. It's just not that big of a deal. You get used to it really fast. And most people driving Miatas in most type of performance situations that you're going to find Miatas in, you're going to be happy that you went with this lightweight flywheel when you did the clutch, hence the Happy Meal kit. So let's see. How would you know if your clutch was failing and it was time to replace it? The stock clutch is good for about 140, 150 wheel horsepower before it starts to slip. So, you know, for example, any of our turbo systems are going to make more power than the stock clutch is going to be able to safely handle. As your clutch just gets old, you know, you got 100, 150,000 miles on the car, you know, the stock clutch is starting to get old, or you race it, or you abuse it, or just it's worn out for whatever reasons. What are some signs? A couple signs that your clutch might be getting worn out and be about time for replacement. One is smell. When the clutch starts, if you're really abusive on your clutch, kind of like with brakes and brake pads, if you're really abusive on it, or if it's starting to get worn out and it's starting to slip a lot, you're going to create a lot of heat from the friction and it's going to smell. And I don't know if I can describe the smell, but it's just got this burning clutch smell. And you know, you're like, oh God, that's not a good smell. And I just did something back here and something was funny and now it smells. You know, kind of put A and B together. And the smell would be an indication that maybe it's time to do the clutch. You know, if you're out there doing smoky burnouts and drag race launches and things like that. Or if it's just worn out and it's just slipping way too much during engagement or when you're driving. Another thing that's really obvious is when your revs outpace your acceleration. So, the job of the pressure plate is to clamp down on this friction surface between the pressure plate and the flywheel. And so once you engage it, they are clamped and they're a one-to-one relationship. So if this is starting to wear out and all of a sudden you start to apply additional torque, either because it's wearing out or because you put on a turbo and you kept the stock clutch in there and there's just too much torque for it to handle, it's going to slip. And, so the friction surface hooked up is going to not be able to maintain that grip, and things are going to slip. And then what will happen is all of a sudden your engine RPM is going to ramp up, but the car is not going to accelerate anywhere near the rate of the RPM ramping up because they're not connected to each other. So, your revs go way up, but the car doesn't go anywhere. So that's a pretty good indication, which is probably going to be followed by a funny smell. Strangely high pedal engagement. As this surface wears and gets thinner and thinner, your pedal engagement's going to come up, and so as it starts to get pretty old and worn out, you're going to find that your pedal engagement is just way up at the top of the clutch pedal. So that's another indication that your clutch is starting to get worn out. And also bad bearing noises. If you've got a bad release bearing or pilot bearing, it's going to start making funny whirring noises that may or may not go away as you depress the clutch pedal, but it kind of sounds like it's coming from the transmission and it's relating to the speed of the engine. If those bearings start to go bad, the clutch itself might not be bad, it could just be a bearing, but you have to do all the same work to pull the transmission, to get in there, to do that, so you might as well service everything at the same time, because the time and effort it takes to pull a transmission, which to do a full clutch job on all 4 generations, the book time is around 3 3/4 hours. So let's call it 4 hours. How long that takes you as a home mechanic, probably a little bit longer, but the book time is give or take around 4 hours. So whether you're just replacing the pilot bearing or replacing the whole thing, the energy that you put into pulling the transmission and doing all that labor is bigger than the money that you're going to spend on these pieces parts. So, unless stuff's kind of beyond reproach, you might as well just service it all at the same time. So, one of the things that our kit comes with is this little switch right here. On the NAs and NBs, we have this switch. With pretty much all manual transmission cars, you have to depress the clutch pedal in order to start the engine. And on the NAs and NBs, down on the firewall, kind of above your clutch toes, there's a real heavy gauge wire switch that has a plunger, and that directly passes juice to the starter. It's heavy gauge wire. And with these heavier systems, we like to bypass that so that you can start the engine without having to press on the clutch switch. Why? Because when you depress the clutch, you're putting all that load on your thrust bearing. So in your crankshaft, you've got your crankshaft main bearings, but then you've also got these vertical thrust bearings, and the thrust bearing controls the in play of the crankshaft. And also when you're depressing your clutch, it's giving it a bearing surface to press the crankshaft this way against. And of course, when the engine's running, all the bearings are coated in oil and you're fine. But when the engine is not running, there's no oil pressure. There's probably some residual oil from the last time you drove the car. But when you're putting on a heavier clutch, it's just one thing that, why wear it faster if you don't have to? So we have these things in there. So, you get in the habit of making sure you're in neutral, and then also getting in the habit of starting the car without depressing the clutch. So it just makes this stuff in the thrust bearing live a little bit longer. And the less we have to spend tearing stuff apart to maintain it, the more time we're going to spend driving the car and having fun. So it's an important thing. We do not have equitable things for the NC and the ND because of the way those clutch switches are wired. It's just not applicable. So you'll also notice when you're installing these, now real quick, we do have specific write-ups in our knowledge base. We have other videos that talk about installation and talk about clutch adjustment. So I'm not going to go over clutch adjustment or installation questions today. You can refer to that other stuff or contact our support team at support@flyinmiata.com. However, the one thing that I will mention is installing your clutch and doing those adjustment procedures is very, very important for longevity of the clutch. People ask, how long do these clutches last? Well, we don't have a warranty on clutches just because how people drive, how they install it, how they set it up, did they do everything correctly? There's so many variables there. needless to say, if you install it correctly, if you adjust it correctly, and you treat it well, these things can easily have OE lifespans. You know, if you're making a ton of horsepower, or if you're drag racing, or doing launch control, or doing other abusive things, yes, you can shorten the life. Or another thing is if you don't install it correctly in terms of preparation. So for example, it's very, very important that these surfaces, notice I'm kind of hovering and not touching any of this with my hands because my hands have oil on them. And of course, you know, these are packed in oil when they're shipped. But when you clean these off for installation, it's very important, for example, to use brake cleaner to clean all this oily surface off so that it goes in perfectly clean and dry with no fingerprints, no oil, no smudge. And that's a critical component of the longevity of the clutch. If there's any oil on these surfaces, when you install it, it's going to cause, you know, hot spots and other funny things, and it could cause chatter, and it's going to negatively affect the life of your clutch. So how you install it is very important. Getting all that stuff correct, torquing everything, adjusting the pedal. And one other quick note with our stuff that you can see in the pedal adjustment instructions in the video that you can see online or on our other, video that Matt did was called Miata NA and B clutch adjustment, so go check that one out. But it's very, very important with our clutch to install it the first time, do the adjustment, drive it about 1,000 miles to break it in, and then do your clutch adjustment again after that break-in period, because with the way these are designed, they're designed about 20% thicker than their normal operating space for the life. And because they know that this surface wears a little bit during the break-in period, and so after the break-in period, everything's taken a set and you need to go back in and readjust it so that everything's square. And the reason we do this is, we'll get to the weight in a second, but our level 1 clutch is extremely daily drivable, and the pedal effort really isn't that much more than stock. For example, the stock pedal, if you were to take a bathroom scale and use it to press the clutch pedal and see how many pounds it is, a stock clutch is it's around, give or take, around 9 pounds. Whereas our level 1 clutch is around 12 pounds. It's really not that much heavier than stock. Our level 2 clutch is about 24 pounds. So that one is quite a lot heavier. But most people are getting the level 1 clutch because that's going to be good for anything you can do on a stock internal engine. And the way that we were able to get a high clamping force without a crazy pedal effort was by rearranging the geometry of the splines and the throw. And in order to do that, we have to have a relatively long throw. So we had to set it up where the clutch pedal has to be adjusted out for a relatively long throw in order to get this thing in its operating range where it's going to be good. So, you know, many clutches on the market you can just throw in and go, but with ours specifically, you do need to do the adjustment, break it in, and then do the adjustment again, and then you should be good to go for a very long time. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, you can reach out to our support team at support@flyinmiata.com. So I've talked a lot. Let me make sure that I'm not missing anything before we go on. How much power can they handle? That's a good one. That was a question that we got. How much beefy horsepower can each of our clutch kits handle? Well, our level 1 kit, we always say this is good for pretty much anything you can do on an engine with stock internals. So, and that includes turbo. And kind of on paper, let's say, you know, up to around 300 horse. Because with a stock engine, you know, you're generally not going to go more than about 250 horse if you want it to be long-term reliable with the turbo system. So with that being said, we just kind of say level 1, anything you can do on a stock internal engine that's going to be long-term reliable. Once you start to get that, you know, into the built engine territory, the 300 plus wheel horse, that's when you want to get into a level 2 clutch. We've put our level 2 clutches on big turbo stroker cars up to, you know, that we're making, I think the biggest one we did here is about 425 wheel on a Mazda speed turbo stroker. And that thing has, it's a street car, you know, so it's not getting abused on track, but it's a street car. It's been on the street for 6-8 years now. And I'm not aware that he's had to replace the clutch, just driving it around as a high horsepower, you know, extra street car. I don't know if it's being daily driven, but you get the point. Up into that 400 horse range is fine on the level 2. You know, if you were doing something crazy where you're going like 500-600 horse, then you might want to get into some sort of a custom clutch solution. But there's so few guys doing that it's not a situation where we're going to, you know, build something custom to put on the, or build something to put on the shelf. It's going to be a custom solution. So our level 1 and level 2 clutch is going to cover 99% of Miata owners. So the feel is good, the pedal effort is good, the longevity is good, as long as you pay special care to install correctly and follow the instructions for adjustment. So moving on. Another question is B6 versus BP. So, you know, the 1.6 versus the 1.8. The Happy Meal as a whole bolts onto all 1990 B6 all the way through 2005 BP Miatas. Of course, the 90 to 93 cars, the clutch and flywheel was different than the 94 to 05 BP cars. However, the crankshaft bolt pattern is the same, the ring gear is the same, all that stuff is the same. So as a package, this bolts right onto a 1.6 crankshaft, transmission goes right on. Now you cannot mix and match 1.6 and 1.8 parts, just kind of like with suspension between NA and NB. You know, you can take an entire assembly and go between NA and NB, but you can't mix and match the pieces parts. Same thing here, entire assembly for all B6 and BP, but you can't mix and match the pieces parts. So we've never done a specific 1.6 clutch because there's really no reason, because if you have a 1.6, just get the Happy Meal, and then you're probably gonna want this anyway, put it on, and you're gonna be good to go. And you're gonna be better off in the long run, because the 1.8 clutch, just by design, is a slightly heavier rated clutch than the 1.6 clutch was anyway. So next, what else might you need when you're doing a clutch job? Anytime you're doing maintenance on the car, you know, I've always tried to stop and think. I'll even close my eyes and I'll visualize the car and look at all the stuff around what I'm gonna be working on and say, if I'm going to be in here doing this, what else would it be smart for me to do at the same time? So, for example, you know, if you're doing a turbo kit, you probably also want to think about, oh, I should maybe do the engine mounts. Maybe I should do the spark plugs. Maybe I should do the spark plug wires. You know, things like that are kind of related, and they're going to be in the wheelhouse when you're doing the job anyway. And it's going to be easier to do it then than have to do it at a later time. In terms of the clutch job, because the transmission's coming out and all those things are going to get touched, there's a list of things that you want to consider. Let's start with the rear main seal. So transmission's out. If you're going to be in there, your rear main seal is probably very old and probably very hard at this point. So whether it's leaking or not, now's a really convenient time to get a new rear main seal. And I will also tell you that because the rear main seal is so big, it's also really a good idea to get our specialty seal installer tool for the rear main seal, because that's a really easy one to get in a little lopsided. And if it goes in lopsided, you're going to put everything back together, you're going to fire it up, and you're going to start seeing oil dripping out from that transmission, and you're going to be really mad. So that's an especially important one to get that tool so that you can get the rear main seal installed perfectly straight. On the transmission side, you've got, you know, the transmission input seal and, you know, the paper gasket, depending on if it's a 5-speed or a 6-speed. Once again, really easy to get to while you're in there. And that's usually pretty nasty. When you pull off a transmission bell housing, it's usually pretty nasty in there and all slung with oil all the way around. And, you know, since the transmission is out anyway, the transmission rear main seal is really a nice thing to do because it's out anyway. The shift boots are a really nice thing to do because it's out anyway. The transmission fluid, once again, because it's out anyway. It just saves so much time to just batch all this stuff when it's out. Another couple really important things is the clutch slave cylinder. On the Miata, the clutch slave cylinder is kind of just a replacement item, kind of like main relays and coil packs on 99s. Just a replacement item, especially when you go to a heavier clutch. It's a really smart idea to just go ahead and put in a new clutch slave at the same time. And while you've got the system cracked, you might as well also go ahead and put in a steel braided clutch hose at the same time, because the system's open and you're in there anyway. So it's just one of those things that's really silly not to spend the extra couple bucks and just do the work right then, because then it's done. And you can move forward and you can focus on having fun and driving the car and not having to worry about that. So, you know, you're going to need some fresh brake fluid when you do that, because you got to use the brake fluid to bleed out and flush the clutch slave system while you're in there. A couple other things that, you know, you might not think about: the heater hoses. The heater hoses coming around the back of the engine with the transmission out, they are really easy to get to. And those things are maintenance items on NAs and NBs, especially on NAs, where the cam angle sensor can start to drip oil down on there, make the rubber get soft and swell, and then explode and leave you on the side of the road. So it's a really easy time to do that. And then also the engine mounts. If you have an NA or an NB and it's still on the original engine mounts, I can pretty much guarantee they're ripped in half and they're junk. So getting a new set of either stock or our Mazda competition engine mounts, which are 40% stiffer, and we recommend for all, performance applications, especially the turbo cars. Transmissions out, you just got more space in there. It's just an easy thing to do, to go ahead and, safely support the engine up and change out the engine mounts. So, just like I said, stop and think anytime you're doing a maintenance job, what else is in the vicinity? What else is it going to be worth my time? Because time is money, to just go ahead and knock it out so that you can be done. And then you've got confidence. You're driving the car, you're commuting, you're traveling. You've just got more confidence that things are done well, and you can spend your time enjoying the car, and you don't have that little thing in the back of my mind, oh, maybe I should have done that, or else it's going to leave me on the side of the road. So things to think about. So that's kind of an overview of what's our Happy Meal. Why might you need a new clutch system? What are some additional things to think about, peripheral stuff, et cetera, et cetera. If you have any questions, please reach out to our customer support team at support@flyinmiata.com, and please bear with us. We're generally pretty busy in our support department. Sometimes it takes guys a little while. If you need immediate help, you want to call. If you're not in a hurry, great, please email us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. We appreciate that. If you have any other questions, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and subscribe. We always like seeing comments and just having some interaction with everybody. That's super awesome. And speaking of interaction, we do have our annual summer camp coming up. This is only relevant right now because once it's posted to YouTube in 6 months, it'll be behind us. But our annual summer camp is coming up June 10 and 11th, right here at our shop in Palisade, Colorado. And you can find out more information on our website at flyinmiata.com. So, overview of clutches, the 101, the how, the why, some basic information. Thank you very much for being here, and we hope to see you next time at Facebook Live. All right, take care.